Hello and good afternoon. Sorry for the little delay there, and let me introduce myself. I'm Joe Sabatini. I'm presenting the Albuquerque Historical Society's monthly presentation. This one is about Erna Fergusson. Many of you will know Erna Fergusson through her writing. A lot of Albuquerque citizens do not know of Erna Fergusson, except that there is a branch library named for her. So I'm going to share her life and career with you. Let me introduce myself. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and got a library degree at the University of California at Los Angeles. I came to New Mexico as a VISTA volunteer in Sandoval County, worked for 5 years at the law library of the University of New Mexico, and then had a long career with the Albuquerque Public Library. The last 10 years of which were at Special Collections, which is the local history and then also the genealogy branch of the public library. In that service, I learned a lot about Erna Fergusson and her involvement in the growth of the public library. These days, after my retirement in 2008, I have volunteered at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center and been active in the Albuquerque Historical Society and the Neighborhood Association and other things. So let me say that I will be doing a fairly long presentation about Erna and her life and times. And if you have questions, please put them in your chat box and they will be provided to me at the end of the program. So let's start screen sharing and get this show on the road. So you see in the opening panel, the painting done by Wilson Hurley of Erna Fergusson, that is in the branch library. And placid, distinguished lady of letters. That's what we call her, New Mexico's first lady of letters. Her story starts with her grandfather, Franz Huning, born in 1827. He was born in Dielingendorf in Hanover, Germany. He had 3 younger brothers, Karl, born in 1832, Louis in 1834, and Henry in 1838. Franz was old enough to get involved in the Great Revolution of 1848. People all throughout Germany, France, Austro-Hungarian Empire revolted against their governments. And for a short time, democratic rule was put in place. The monarchies that were threatened succeeded in suppressing those revolutions, and that caused a lot of free thinkers and anti-monarchists and proto-socialists from those countries to leave to avoid the oppression and repression of those monarchies. And many of them came to the United States. Franz and Karl came to New Orleans. And I'm sorry for the phone, pardon me. And like a lot of Germans, they came to both the central, the hill country of central Texas, and a lot of them went to St. Louis, which was what Franz and Carl did. And then they got a job on a wagon train going to California. But when they got to Santa Fe, they dropped off this wagon train and got into the mercantile business. And there were, at that point, both Germans and German Jews who were coming into the territory as it became occupied by the United States, and creating these mercantile businesses. After a period where Franz was traveling in New Mexico and Arizona, he settled in Albuquerque in 1859 and established a number of business operations, including a mercantile store and a flour mill. The two other of his brothers, his youngest brothers, came to New Mexico also. Louis and Henry came in 1858, and they settled in Los Lunas. Henry later moved to Arizona, but Louis remained in Los Lunas, and successive generations of their family served that community. Most recently, Louis Huning IV was a mayor of Los Lunas. So around the late 1850s, Franz gets into the trading business on the Santa Fe Trail. He gets wagons and that he takes to St. Louis or Independence, Missouri, and freights goods back to New Mexico. And he does very well at it. This picture is from a book where his granddaughter transcribed his diaries and notes into a wonderful story of his trading days. As he went around, he as he went to St. Louis, he would connect up with the German community there, and in 1863, he met and married Ernestine Frank, who's also a native of Germany. They married, and he brought her out to Albuquerque. They bought a home in a place called La Glorieta, which is still there today. It's one of the oldest buildings remaining in Albuquerque. A lot of early Albuquerque buildings got wiped out in periodic floods, and of the buildings that survived, only San Felipe de Neri Church, or part of it, the older part of it, is older than La Glorieta, which is now the Manzano Day School, the center of their property. They had 4 children: Clara Mary, who was born in 1865, Arno, who was born in 1869, and you'll know Arno from the name of a street in the Hunings Highlands. Lena was born in 1872, and Ellie, who was born in 1874, but who died at age 6. Here's a picture of La Glorieta, a typical Spanish hacienda, if you will, with the house surrounding central plaza with a giant cottonwood in the middle of it. Then as Franz prospered, he decided to build an Italianate castle, which is on the dividing line between the city of Albuquerque and the Bernalillo County. And Castle Huning is a remarkable structure. It was built of terrones, which is like adobe, but it's from sod, from grass, cut sod. And he had 400 acres on that property in the area we now know as the Country Club District, some of which was marshland, but he built this castle. Franz was involved in the land transactions which enabled the Santa Fe Railroad to come to town and create New Albuquerque, the downtown district. And Franz also purchased land east of where the tracks were going, which is the Hunings Highlands, the first subdivision in New Albuquerque. Castle Huning was occupied by Erna after Franz's death, and then it became a private school, but it succumbed to the urban renewal frenzy of the 50s and was torn down in 1955. The oldest daughter, Clara, grew up in pre-railroad Albuquerque, and they sent her to school. They were Franz and Ernestine believed in education, and they sent her both to schools in Santa Fe, and then, as a lot of the merchants on the Santa Fe Trail did, they sent her to school in St. Louis, and then they also sent her back to Germany for schooling there and to connect up with the relatives who were still back in Germany. The man on the right is Harvey Butler H.B. Fergusson. He's born in Alabama in 1848, so he's too young to fight in the Civil War, but is subject to its devastation. He goes to a college in Virginia, which was called Washington College. We now know it as Washington and Lee University because Robert E. Lee became the president of that university. Got a law degree, became a lawyer, got into a mining firm in West Virginia, which somehow had claims in White Oak in southern New Mexico. He came out to represent that company, got a bad case of enchantment, stayed, and became a business person and a politician. So he met and married Clara in 1887, and this is a family portrait about 1891. Harvey and Clara had 4 children, and all of them had some sort of literary career. So here in this picture, here is Franz, here is Ernestine, here is Lena. That's a daughter who of Franz who died a couple of years after this picture. Here's Clara. Here's Arno, and back here is the 3-year-old Erna, and in HB's lap is Harvey, the first boy. The next 2 children, Francis and Lena, named after the the Aunt Lena who died will come along shortly. Erna grows up in this is in Old Town, so she's active in this upper class family in Albuquerque, but she is growing up with her Spanish neighbors, and she also is learning German, so she, like the rest of the family, becomes good at languages, participates in both the public school and in some private schools. Here she is on the left, she's 8 years old. On the right, she's 10 years old in these drama productions. Here's a picture from 1901. Erna's in the upper right corner. She's 13. And here's, let's see, Clara's back here. This is Harvey. Here's Ernestine and Franz, and HB and Lena. Maybe Francis was taking the picture. So H.B. Fergusson becomes a leader in the Territorial Democratic Party and is elected to serve as the territorial delegate to Congress in 1898. During that term, he put through an act in Congress called the Fergusson Act, which gave New Mexico millions of acres of public domain. And the revenue from those lands was dedicated to funding public educations, both public schools and universities. And thus providing a foundation of a public school system in the territory. You'll hear the state land commissioners, whoever that person is, talking about we gained so much from royalties from gas and oil from our public lands that went to millions, tens of millions of dollars to the public schools. Winrock Center is state public land that generates a revenue to the University of New Mexico to this day. So if he did nothing else in his career, H.B. Fergusson served this state tremendously with that one act. And of course, he continued to advocate for statehood. And when we did get statehood, he was first appointed to Congress as soon as President Taft signed statehood. And then he was elected in 1912 to serve as one of 2 New Mexico congressmen. Oops. Okay, so Erna's education goes various places. She graduates from Albuquerque High School, and then she gets sent to a finishing school in Los Angeles, and then she goes back east to be with her father when he's in Congress, and then goes to Columbia and gets a master's degree in history after her undergraduate at UNM, and comes back and becomes a faculty member at Albuquerque High School. She's right in the center of this. She teaches English and Spanish. This is in 1915 and 16. In 1916, they dedicate the yearbook to her because I guess if you're a new faculty member, they stick you with doing the yearbook. So the yearbook staff dedicated the yearbook to her. The yearbook is called Laureata, which is why that string is there. The lariat, Laureata. This was the year that the most famous high school athlete of all time in New Mexico came to prominence, a man named Owen Smalding. You'll see that the photo archivist at the Albuquerque Museum just put up one of her 10-minute short subjects about Owen Smalding. And so she was there in the days of Albuquerque High's athletic glory. But she didn't really care to do teaching. And when World War I came along, she joined the Red Cross. She was selected to a position as Red Cross Home Service Secretary and State Supervisor for New Mexico. What does that mean? That means you travel throughout New Mexico and look into cases that where people need some help. Like in Rancho State House, we have Pedro Valdez of Rancho State House serving in the American Expeditionary Force in France. Juanita Valdez of Rancho State House says, I'm entitled to a soldier's allotment, a family allotment that soldiers can have their salary, some of it sent back to their families. And I'm the common law wife of Pedro, and she would validate those claims, and so that those families could get that kind of support. And that took her to places throughout the state of New Mexico, but particularly in the North Pole, both the Nuevo Mexicano and the Native American communities around the state. And she got a network, basically, of friends, of people that she would work with. So at the end of the war, she came back to Albuquerque and got a job on the Evening Herald newspaper, kind of a society writer. And she would also write these histories. She had a column, basically, that in 1922-23, Do You Remember? She wrote 40 different columns of, do you remember the first train? Do you remember the first baseball team? Do you remember the first fire company, the first motor car? And she was making a living then that way. Then she and a friend named Ethel Hickey, they got asked to take for people. Some people asked her if they could help. They wanted to see a penitente ceremony or ritual or church, and they would pay. That turns into a business. Erna Fergusson is the first female dude wrangler. They created a firm called Koshare Tours, and they offered 20 or so different trips. You could come to New Mexico on a train, get on and get off, and they would take you around in this large vehicle. So this is a Christmas card, I guess, that they sent to former patrons. They advertised nationally, and here's a brochure that they would list the various opportunities. And you probably can't see it too well, but the light lines on the maps were places that they would go. You could go to Chalico at Zuni, or the snake dance at Walpi and Hopi. land, or up to Taos for San Hieronimo Day. And they were making a very good living for about 5 years with Koshare tours. Here's a photograph of Erna. That's probably at Puye. That the gentleman is the driver and the guy who would enable you to get out of the sand you were stuck in, and two patrons. So Erna got written up in Sunset Magazine as a woman dude wrangler. And she describes to them how she ran that business, that she kept her customers comfortable regardless of the weather, and found them places to sleep along these 2 and 3 day tours. The Indian Pueblo Cultural Center was gifted with scrapbooks from a family in Pennsylvania that took those tours. And now in 1925, the Harvey Company comes along and says, we want to buy your business. They do, and they turn it into Indian Detours. And they hire Erna to train all the guides, couriers, they called them. They had specific uniforms, the velveteen blouses and the tan pants and the forest ranger hats and the squash blossom necklaces. And the drivers were also these burly fellows who could manage the wonderful roads of New Mexico. So here is Charles Sipe and his wife Annie. They first came in 1923 and did a Koshare tour, and then they came back in 1927 and did an Indian Detour, and we have their scrapbooks at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center's Library and Archives. This is Mrs. Sipe. We think their young adult daughter, Anne, took this photograph. And here's some snapshots from their venture. Here's the Alvarado, and here I think there's Wright's trading post in Albuquerque. This may be the cistern up on the top of Sky City at Acoma. And so they would stop in various places. You get the business card from their courier, and they must have bought pottery from Clito Tafoya. And we had, when Clyde Tingley was governor, he started the state tourism department, and he had this message about how if you may go to see Indians living practically the way Coronado found them, but when you go to their village, you should show them as much respect and that you are in their town as you would expect from them if they came to your town. So I have this fantasy of the Clito Tafoya family walking down Lehigh Street in Allentown, Pennsylvania, looking at Charles Sipe's home. But anyway, Erna trained all those couriers with too much information, and so they could answer any question that the guests in the detour could possibly ask. So remember, this is the 20s, and women now have the vote. And Erna is well ensconced in the society of the ladies of Albuquerque, who are active in various clubs, and the League of Women Voters, and civic betterment groups, library groups, church groups. who cluster together as the General Federation of Women's Clubs. And there's a saying, the ladies, God bless them, are advocating for better schools and better health. And they get involved in the library. Now, when Erna was 12, we had this peculiar political fight about setting up the library as a city library rather than a women's club library. She was at table when her mother was involved in this fight. So when we have the original building on the Edith and Central site, the school building that had been built by the Congregationalists New West Education Association, that got turned over immediately when the school board got set up in 1891, and then was later turned into the city public library, thanks to Joshua and Sarah Reynolds buying it and conveying it to the city for public library. Well, by the 20s, this building was no longer satisfactory, and there were some small fires, and the General Federation of Women's Club group advocated that we should have a new library. And there's Erna right in the middle of names you'll know, Stovers and Bakekis and Rices and Corbers, who are these ladies of the prominent families of Albuquerque, saying, how about you, the city, doing a new library, and we'll help you with the bond issue. Well, sure enough, if your guys are going to help us, you ladies are going to help us, we'll do it. And we're growing, the city's growing, and up over the mesa there, up towards UNM, there's growth along, excuse me, growth along Central based on the development of tuberculosis sanitariums, and the university is starting to grow effectively. One of our leading architectural firms building in New Albuquerque is the Trost and Trost company. They put up a suggestion. Here's a library, and we also need a fire station up in the Heights. And so here's a combo. Well, fascinating, but that's not what they did. The city put up a bond issue, and the library was quite successful. And then somebody sued about, well, they can't be doing that. And the legislature comes along and says, yes, they can. So by June of 1924, they're ready to get started. And there's this fascinating political piece that happens. And in 1955, Erna goes to a convocation in Los Angeles, put together by the UCLA Library, about libraries in the Southwest and how they developed. And Erna speaks to what happened. And it's a wonderful story all by itself, relating to Clyde Tingley. And so on Tuesday, the 17th, in the evening, the city commission votes to contract the destruction of the old school building. And then the city commission chairman, Edwin Swope, is a delegate to the Democratic National Convention of 1924, which turns out to be the worst single national political party convention in the history of the United States. They're in New York City. It's hot and humid, and there's two candidates of equal strength, and they have 103 votes over 17 days. So Swope is stuck out there. Well, the vice chair of the city commission is this young commissioner named Clyde Tingley. Clyde reconvenes the commission on Wednesday morning and says, well, we need to do something different. So Erna describes it this way. The chairman of the city commission at this time was a very picturesque gentleman who had no books and naturally saw no point in anybody else having them, but he was a builder. He liked buildings. That interested him, and he said to me one time, you know, I seen all that stone in that old Reynolds building, and the city commission agreed that a new fire station would be fine, and you couldn't get better stone than tearing down that old library. Then there was going to be a whole pile of bricks, which they might as well use to build a new library. The ladies, bless them, thought that they had to do with a new library. And here it all hinged on the fact that the stone was going to make such a fine fire station. Anyway, the new building was built, and of course it has not proved large enough, but nevertheless, it's a functioning library. So Thursday, the books are all moved to the First Ward School. Friday, the building is, Friday it's moved, the books are moved, and Saturday, the building is dynamited. And they use the bricks as the masonry for this wonderful public library that was to be built. They decided at the recommendation of Erna and her lady friends as a Pueblo Spanish revival style architecture. And Erna is quoted talking to the commission as saying, you know, I know something about tourism. If we do this, look at what Santa Fe is doing with all their regional architecture. This could be a treasure that will help in our presentation of ourselves as a unique Southwestern community. And in fact, here in this postcard, right in the middle, is the postcard of the filled letter of the new building. And the community was very proud of it. More than 1,000 people came to the opening reception in March of 1925. And the unions who worked on it were so proud that they put out their own postcard of the interior of it. And this is the postcard that you saw a piece of in the filled letter postcard of a Pueblo or mission style library that served starting in 1925. So Erna's career as a writer gets started about this time. This is her brother, Harvey. Harvey went to New York, became a newspaperman, and then he started writing novels successfully. And he also wrote some nonfiction and also was a screenwriter. He went to Hollywood and was a screenwriter for a time. So he had connections with the Alfred Knopf publishing company. And one time Erna visited her and he introduced her to some people he knew both at Knopf and at some of the magazines that were national magazines that were published in New York. And so she asked him, well, what about writing books? Is that something I could do? He said, any fool can write a book, which shows their sibling rivalry, I think. But when she talked to the an editor at Century magazine, she described 3 articles that she might do about um, the Spanish people of New Mexico, or how Albuquerque grew after the railroad got here. And that editor said, send articles like that to us. That sounds like things that would be of interest to our readers. And so she goes home and tries to write it and shares it with a writer named Kyle Crichton, who had come to Albuquerque to get a cure for tuberculosis. Kyle Crichton is noted mostly for his biography of Fago Baca, Law and Order Limited. Kyle shows him the drafts of her magazine articles, and he says, "Gee, you've got good stuff. Isn't it a shame that you don't have the brains to write it?" Which was provocative. And she said, well, what am I supposed to do? I said, "Write it like you tell it." And that guided her into her writing career. So here's her description of how the train spoiled everything, when the train changed the whole dynamic of Albuquerque. This is in Century magazine, so she did successfully place it. And so she starts writing, and one of the things that's suggested to her is, why don't you write a book about all those Indian ceremonials you used to take your tourists to, your dudes that you trucked out to the reservations. And she does, and it's called Dancing Gods, published in 1931. This cover is the reprint edition in 1951. But so she writes a book that is still used today. That is, you still can get a feel if you go to the feast day dance at Santo Domingo Quewa, and you read Erna's description of that August 4th day, and it still gives you a good feel for it, because she had sympathy for what they were doing. She knew people in the Pueblo and were friends with, and was able to convey it not just as a tourist attraction, but they'll get a sense of the lives of the people and their community. And she starts now traveling to Latin America to write about Mexico, and here are books that she published during the 30s. So she becomes a prominent local author during the 30s, and is also writing magazine articles. She gets written up in New Mexico Magazine for her work. I did this spreadsheet, which shows over the course of her life that she wrote steadily and she sold steadily. Remember now, she's living with her mother, who is her widowed mother, and is the sole support because the other 3 children have left the state, and so she's making a living as a writer. And so this is her a representation of her steady output over time, both for writing for national magazines and publishing books. Along comes World War II, and we have the situation where Ernie Pyle, the famous American journalist, the traveling journalist of the Scripps Howard newsletter, finally decides to stop wandering and establish a base. Stops living out of hotels, which he had done for the past 6 years. So he builds a home on Girard Avenue in Albuquerque, and that's he and his wife Jerry there. Then he goes off to be this beloved World War II correspondent, and he when he is shot and killed on the island of Ieshima during the invasion of Iwo Jima in April of 1945, a week after the death of President Franklin Roosevelt, the whole nation mourns the loss of this man and his telling the story of the American GI. Mayor Tingley, City Commission Chair Tingley, immediately realizes we need to have an Albuquerque memorial to Ernie Pyle. And 10 days after Pyle's death, he appoints a blue ribbon committee to help decide how Albuquerque will memorialize Ernie Pyle. To chair that committee, he appoints Erna Fergusson. And they're not pals. They're not friendly because they have such radically different social standing. Clyde was a machinist who married the boss's daughter, who had to come to the Southwest to cure her tuberculosis. Was put off the train in Albuquerque because of a severe attack on the way to Phoenix, and he follows her out, and she's cured and they marry, and that's Carrie Tingley, obviously, and we cherish her memory as well. But so the committee has the editor of the Tribune, the Scripps Howard newspaper, the PR guy and journalism professor from UNM, Keene Rafferty, the famous attorney and historian Will Kelleher, other very prominent people. And they solicit suggestions from the citizens, and they start a fund to fund whatever it is they're going to do. And so we have in the files this very strange picture. What is going on here? In the basement of City Hall, just outside the men's room, that Clyde, with his beautiful tie and outgoing political persona, why is he handing a piece of currency greater than a $1 bill to Erna Fergusson, dressed up like she's doing something important? And the look on her face, well, the lady of a certain age who was a longtime venerable member of the Albuquerque Historical Society said, lipstick wasn't as good then as it is now. She's trying to fix her lipstick to get a good pose for herself. So it's a photo op gone bad. And this is not a bribe in City Hall. This is Clyde giving money towards this memorial committee. And as it turns out, the committee, in its first meeting, Erna throws out the suggestion, maybe we could have a veterans reading room in the library. But 6 months later, Pyle's widow, Geraldine, dies. And that suggestion of Erna's turns into, why don't we obtain the house and make both a shrine to Erna Pyle and a branch library. We're growing so fast now because of the Air Force base that when we're growing towards the southeast, we need a branch library. So let's use the house as a branch library, which becomes, of course, the Ernie Pyle Branch Library and shrine to Ernie. So there's the second time where Erna Fergusson is a key player in the development of our public library system. She keeps on writing, she keeps on traveling, more books about Latin America, and then she writes a book about Albuquerque. She takes her Albuquerque Herald columns as one portion of that book and writes an introduction about Albuquerque in 1948, what it's like. Her youngest sister, Lena Fergusson, marries a California man, Chester Brown, who is, and then Lena was the one who transcribed Franz Huning's diaries. Their daughter, who is named Lee, is an artist, and she comes out and helps with illustrations for Erna's book. And so this is called the book called Erna Fergusson's Albuquerque, and we have a fine printer in Albuquerque named Merle Armitage, who publishes these fine press editions of books. And this is her. This is the title page and cover for the Erna Fergusson's Albuquerque book. And here's one of Lena's one of Lee's drawings for that book. And you can see in her text how Albuquerque gets its name, and how the church gets its name, honoring King Philip of Spain, as well as the Duke. And the extra R was dropped more than a century later by the sort of people who would still like to lose a Q or two. She is an astute social commentator along with her descriptive prose. She travels to Cuba and writes a book about Cuba and the American presence there, as well as the impact of the American presence on the history of Cuba. She recalls her father, who was involved in several legal cases in territorial and early statehood New Mexico. And that's the basis for Murder and Mystery in New Mexico. And she describes some contemporary crimes, as well as crimes like the murder of Albert Fountain and his son in southern New Mexico, where H.B. Fergusson was the attorney trying to convict some people who were accused of that murder. Again, a Merle Armitage edition that is still good reading these days. So they're living now. She and her mother, Clara, are living at 1021 Orchard Place. That house is still there, and it's near 12th and Lomas. I skipped over the fact that after Harvey, or after HB was defeated for Congress in the election of 1914, he became despondent. He had some financial issues, and his marriage was no longer happy, and he commits suicide. The papers lied about that. They said he died of a stroke, but it's a fact that he committed suicide. And this was a burden on the family going forward. And the fact that Erna's social life, she never married, and part of that was because she was obliged to take care of her widowed mother, who lives to be 85. From 1915 to 1950, she is living with her mother. They sell La Glorieta after HB's death, and they move to Orchard Place, where they stay. And after Clara passes away, Erna buys a home at 2704 Veranda Northwest, which is near what becomes the Rio Grande Nature Center. And so she's back on the farm, basically, and all through this, she is hostess to the literary and political class. She has in effect, salons, and she continues to be active civically, and she keeps writing. She goes back to Mexico. Her cookbook gets reprinted. Her Dancing Gods gets reprinted. She writes a new book, and here's where we get three peoples living in harmony. Well, if you read her book, that's not quite what she's saying, but here's in 1951, she publishes this history of the state and its peoples. It's very successful. Here's where she is active in the Library of Friends, and she is the speaker at Mortarboard Alumni, a group of educated ladies who, in this tea where she is presenting at the public library, they're asked to dress in their fiesta wear. Here are some articles. International figures visit her. She publishes in New Mexico Quarterly. She's continues to do lectures. The University of New Mexico has a series called Lectures Under the Stars, which is a weekly summer night lecture series, and here she is appearing. She does this annually. She's one of the regulars who participates in this ongoing series of lectures, and she's here she's talking about three women of the 19th century: New Mexico, Susan McGoffin on the Santa Fe Trail, and Susan Wallace, the wife of Governor Lew Wallace, and her not complimentary essays on New Mexico when she was here, and Sister Blandina Segal, the Italian-born nun who built hospitals and schools in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Trinidad, Colorado, and wrote a wonderful memoir that is one of the things, the 100 things you should read when you're reading Albuquerque history. And when she went to Los Angeles to do that presentation in 1955, she becomes acquainted with the UCLA library director, Lawrence Clark Powell, who is also interested in the Southwest, its libraries and its literature, and it writes extensively on it, essays that he publishes. And so they become friends, and he is a regular visitor every year to visit her. She's now starting to feel her age, and she's got hip problems, and so she's not able to get around as well as she used to. So people come to visit her, people of all classes who just she cherishes their company and shares with her her legacy with these wide array of visitors. So here's Powell dedicating his book of essays to her in appreciation for their friendship. Powell writes a wonderful long article on Erna's life and career in the March 1962 issue of New Mexico Magazine. And so at this point, her health continues to decline. She gets a cancer, and on July 30th of 1964, she dies. Like many other of the Hunings, she was not religious, and she asked to be cremated and her ashes to be spread on the then unpopulated West Mesa. So there she is. And her memorial service is at the University Memorial Chapel. In this period of time, the city is still in its tremendous growth phase, and it is trying to catch up with all of the city services, and libraries are, not in the same class as streets and sewers, street lights. So we're way behind on doing new libraries. They had built a library in the Heights at near Manoa, Wyoming, which was the Prospect Park, then the Wyoming, and now the Tony Hillerman branch. And immediately that branch surpassed the circulation at Maine. So they were way too busy. They needed another branch in the Northeast Heights, and had passed the bond issue and were in the process of designing it when Erna died. And immediately the city commission votes to change the name to the Erna Fergusson Library. And this is the original building that was opened in 1966 and has served the Mid Heights since then. In 2002, it was decided to expand this library and rebuild it, and that passed, and was we have the library we know today, the Erna Fergusson Branch Library, in this remarkable building with the piece of public art which has letters falling all around, big aluminum letters, as the public art pieces, both in the median on San Mateo and in the front of the building, and in the cement and stuff. So I thank you for your attention, and this I credit and appreciate all the people who helped me do this talk. I particularly when I was asked to do a talk on the occasion of the 134th anniversary of Erna's birth on January 10th, I had another talk that I do that was requested, but Amy DeBello and Greta Herwig Samuels said, what we really want is a talk about Erna Fergusson. And so that's the origin of this talk, and I credit them, and I appreciate all the usual suspects at the Center for Southwest Research at UNM and the Special Collections Library and the archives at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center to help me do this talk, and also appreciate the architectural work of Edie Cherry and the Cherry C. Reams architectural firm, which created this wonderful new larger branch. And so that is the conclusion of my talk, and I'm now ready for questions, which I see have been conveyed to me. Okay, no, the book on Cuba is not about the Sandoval County community. It's about the country in the which was in the 40s. So it reflects its time. Janet Sayers has the question, the driving force to name the branch in honor of Erna Fergusson, the whole town. It was a no-brainer that the week after she died, or 2 weeks after she died, it was on the agenda by the 5 city commissioners to change it. Let me go up to the top here. Can people look at the old Albuquerque High School yearbooks? They're not at special collections, that they are in the genealogy collection at the second floor of New Main Library at 5th and Copper. But they are also available on the New Mexico Digital Collection, which can be accessed through the website of the Center for Southwest Research at UNM. In fact, I was even on there today and getting verifying that she was there while Owen Spalding won the entire 1917 track meet for Albuquerque High School. So the New Mexico Digital Collections is one of the wonderful archives available there. Was Erna born out of wedlock? And how come she grew up in her grandparents' house? No, Harvey or HB and Clara were married in 1887. Erna is born in 1888 in January. She was born in Huning Castle. And Huning Castle is practically across the street, across Central Avenue from La Glorieta. So she didn't grow up there, but she visited a lot and got a sense of her grandparents there. The next question, Adric Menning, the library bond lawsuit, what was that about? Was it publishers objecting to the public library, or citizens objecting to the expenditure? There was I think one cantankerous lawyer who said, you can't bond for these things. The library, and in fact, when the suit, it wasn't just the library, it was the whole package. And the state Supreme Court's reply was, well, legally, based on the New Mexico statutes, you can bond for every one of these things except parks. And so they had to get a law passed saying that cities could bond for public parks. And so they that had nothing to do with the publishers, or it was just it was a law thing rather than an anti-library thing, because you'll notice that the library bond got 83% of the vote, positive vote. Janet Sayers notes Harvey's typewriter. That's just that's a wonderful picture that I found on in the New Mexico digital collection, and we that was available to share. Lori Batiste again. Did Erna ever marry or have a partner? We have in special collections a collection of 4 letters to a friend of hers in Taos, who was a lady who was married in 1929, discussing that Erna had 2 possibilities, 2 gentlemen that she was interested in, but realized that they wouldn't work. And now, in 1929, there's this other man that would be a wonderful partner, but I'm stuck. I can't do it because I have to take care of my mother. So no, the word they use in the 19th and 20th century is spinster. She wasn't happy about it, but she accepted it. And you're welcome to read those letters. It's part of the archive that the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Library has. Michelle Metters asked, who's the other man in the picture with Ernie Pyle? It doesn't say. This photo was taken from George Fitzpatrick's Albuquerque 100 Years in Pictures, published in 1976. And we know that he was explaining to the guy how to roll a cigarette with tobacco out of a pouch. It's different than most of the time you'll see some other pictures of Ernie and Jerry at the house, but that was a remarkable one. Okay, so Anthony Gomez is asking that Erna went to Central High School. True or false? Okay, the history of schools. The public schools are created, and a school board is created in 1891, thanks to the New Mexico legislature passing an enabling act that cities can do that. They immediately used the Reynolds School building to start, and they built 4 ward schools in the 4 quadrants of the city. Today, those are Longfellow, Eugene Fields, Coronado, and Lew Wallace. Those properties are the original properties that the elementary schools. Central School is built in 1900. Previously, the high school operated out of the Reynolds building, and then in a building on South Edith that had been a fire station, I guess, that they it's in the 200 block of South Edith. But then they built a real central school, which was the junior high and high school. It opened in 1900. That would have been the building to which Erna went. In 1914, we have the bond issue to build Albuquerque High School, and then the Central High becomes the junior high school. And so that's the progressive stage of early development of the public school. She would not have gone to the building we know of as Albuquerque High School. Central High was at 3rd and Lead. And okay, Janet Sayers is wondering about Erna's brother and sister didn't want to help with the mother. Well, I don't think that they were hostile. But they were in New York and in California, and they had lives and careers and families, and so she was there, and they weren't. They occasionally visited. And Harvey wrote some very good books about New Mexico, sitting there in New York City. His Home in the West is an autobiography that is a wonderful piece of New Mexicana. But no, they weren't involved. And I guess that's all the questions. If anybody has any more, I'm going to wait a bit to see if anything comes in. But I'm grateful for your attention, and if some question comes up, the Albuquerque Historical Society has an inquiry box on its webpage, so you can send additional questions there. Erna passed by here, left a legacy, and we cherish it both as an interpreter of our community and a true daughter of our community, as well as a benefactress of its public library system.